Okay, so this session is going to talk about systems thinking, cause and effect, first principles, and the factors for effective value streams. These are tools I've used and kind of observed and collected from others. Quite helpful in navigating the work we do in product development. So what we're going to talk about in specific systems are really about relationships. Theory is essential, different areas of complexity that we have to deal with, and first principles, and then factors for effective value streams. So we're going to learn a lot. This is actually a fairly involved session, but it sets the stage for how to do knowledge work in a lot of ways. So this is very much attuned to knowledge work, with or without hardware involved. I mostly mean product development or service development, but something where you're having to figure stuff out that's not straightforward. So I love this quote from Immanuel Kant: experience without theory is blind. In other words, you can't look ahead if all you have is experience, but if you have a theory, then you can do something with it. Okay. And this lives at all places. Actually, I remember avoiding an accident once. The car right in front of me had a car in front of them, but I kind of saw it happening. And I before it happened, I could see it happening. I could see that one car wasn't moving in the right way. And I immediately started to move my car before or just as the cars were hitting, and I missed it like by 2 inches. This is like a 60 mile an hour on an expressway. And that was not using experience. I'd never seen something like that. I'd had a theory I based on experience, and I used it to foretell what was happening. Now, maybe an accident wouldn't have happened, and I just would have done a safe swerve. But it was all instinct and from a theory I had. Theory enables us to avoid a lot of things, both in driving and in product development in particular. And this is a great one from Deming. I sometimes summarize this as experience without, rather, theory without experience is useless, and experience without theory is expensive. But this is the full quote: experience teaches nothing. In fact, there's no experience to record without theory. Without theory, there is no learning, and that is their downfall. People copy examples, and then they wonder what is the trouble. They look at examples, and without theory, they learn nothing. Kind of reminds me of the Spotify model in some sense. Spotify is great. It's a great model explaining what they did, but it was never intended to be something that people copy, because there was a whole underlying thought process underneath it. Okay, so let's start with systems thinking. My favorite guy here is Russ Akoff. It's not where I learned system thinking from. I learned it from Senge's Fifth Discipline and experience. I mean, you see it all the time. But what I like about Akoff is, first, this successful problem solving requires finding the right solution to the right problem. We fail more often because we solve the wrong problem than because we get the wrong solution to the right problem. In other words, if you get the wrong solution to the right problem, oh man, that didn't work. Try it again, get something else. But if you're solving the wrong problem, you don't get anywhere, even with success of the solution. It's kind of crazy. Our ability to solve a problem is limited by a conception of what is feasible. Okay. This is Henry Ford's: whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And if you think you can't see what's going on in complex situations, then you won't be able to. So there's a question of how do you do that? And what's the risks of it? And I'm not saying it's deterministic. No, I mean, I've been around software development for 53 years. And I've solved a lot of problems that had never been solved before. And I've been on teams where somebody else was solving the problem. I was the grunt programmer, where it had never been solved before. And I understand uncertainty, but I also understand a certain set of patterns and continuity. Okay. You rarely improve an organization as a whole by improving the performance of one or more of its parts. This is why I believe this tying teams together and working up doesn't work. It's inherently the wrong problem. If you want to get some really good study on this, one of the 3 top books I recommend are Timeless Way of Building by Chris Alexander. He has a whole different design approach that I learned 30 or so years ago. It's brilliant, and it's not by putting things together. It's just the opposite. I'm not going to talk about that here, but it's an essential piece if you're into theory. By the way, since I mentioned the 3 books I like, the other books are The Obstacle is the Way, which is more of a Stoic book about how to do things, and The Choice by Ellie Goldratt, which is very much about which is about critical thinking. And I'll add these to the lesson plan. Okay, now this is the key. Systems are defined by the relationships between the components. not the components itself. This is very important. You cannot take pieces and put them together and have a good system. If you take the best parts, just consider this, take the best parts of the best cars, put them together, you have a pile of junk. Now here we're putting together parts that were designed to work together, but imagine taking 10 different cars and take the best parts off the 10 different cars, maximize them, put them together, you have a pile of junk. That's what he's saying. It's about how things work together. This idea of trying to improve things individually in isolation and then put them together is senseless. Carness exists in the system as a whole. Okay, this sounds kind of complicated though. Now everything's interacting, and this is what Akoff also says. Systems are about the relationships, and some of these relationships are very, not just complicated, but complex. You mean you can't even see what's going on. The example he uses as one of his talks is the heart's relationship to the other organs in the body. We know it's there. We know there are relationships. Some are pretty clear, but mostly we have no clue. So we have complex relationships in systems thinking. Systems thinking incorporates complexity. Some people say it doesn't, but it really does. And it incorporates it not at the level of domain you're in, but rather what the relationships are. Whoa, this looks complex because I got all these pieces relating to each other. Well, Ellie Goldratt to the rescue. This is from The Choice. He says, if we dive deep enough, we'll find that there are very few elements at the base, the root causes, which through cause and effect connections are governing the whole system. Now, I talk about this as the basis for the factors of effective value streams. I'm going to first start with what I call first principles. These are observed things that govern it. That's what he's really talking about, is first principles. But the factors for effective value streams are those things that actually affect us in that affect us in our work. So he's saying there are some things out there that we can see. Some of those things interact in ways maybe we can't see. And I've created something I call factors for effective value stream that are related, and we'll see that. But this is interesting. He did not say we could see these. He said they existed. Obviously, we can't see them all. The guy was a physicist. He understood uncertainty. He understood complexity, but they do exist, and that's what we want to find. Okay. So first principles are really where I want to start. They describe how the world works from an objective perspective. They stand on their own. Okay, they're not defined, but are discovered through observation and relentless evaluation. I'm going to show you some first principles. They're not right. They're what I've observed, what I've theorized, and I'm going to try to do it in a way where you can see it yourself. Violating them has consequences, typically creating waste and lost opportunities. They can be used to provide guidance as to what individual teams and organizations should do or avoid. The ones I'm going to go through are amplios. These are the sets I've done. Don Reinert's in his Principles of Product Development Flow, second generation lean product development, has hundreds. Some of them are first principles. Most of them are things derived from first principles. So he's got dozens in his book. There are a lot of these. And it's important to understand them. These are like the bridge builders, like laws of gravity, cohesive strength, impact. They do exist. We can't always see how they interact. Okay, so I'm going to go through these. I'm going to go through 8, and I'm going to do it in a way I want you to think about it. Don't answer. Those of you who are watching, don't use, but just think to yourself. Okay, so here's one thing. Consider what happens when you have delays in your workflow, delays in getting feedback, or delays in taking advantage of the feedback. In other words, something happened and then the workflow stops, and then you pick it up later. Remember in the factors for, in the value stream sessions, we talked about the work starts and stops. So what happens when you get those delays? What happens when you don't get feedback quickly? What happens when you don't take advantage of that? Just consider that for a few seconds to yourself. I'm going to suggest they cause waste. That extra work's done or a mistake's done and we don't catch it quickly. So here's my first principle. Now, what's cool here is I think you can agree with this. So you're not getting this because I said it's true. You're getting this because your own experience tells you this is true. So I've got a theory here and you've got experience to back it up. And if you don't, put this in a question in the platform that you're using for the workshop, because I'd like to have a conversation. So delays in workflow, delays in getting feedback, delays in taking advantage of lessons learned cause waste. Okay, let's look at another one. What happens when you focus on local improvements? In other words, a team is hell-bent to make themselves better. They're ignoring everybody else. Have you seen that happen? Look in your experience. When did that happen? Now, maybe sometimes it helped if they were the big block, but I would suggest a lot of times it doesn't necessarily result in global improvement. Okay. So it's not if you focus on local, it's going to be bad, but it often is. That's the point. It's not going to guarantee. Let's look at a third one. How long does it take to build a subset of functionality than all of it? Now, this ignores things like release and other factors, but 6 of one, 6 or half dozen of the other, kind of comparable things. If I've got this big system to deliver, and I decide, well, I'm only going to deliver half of it. Can I deliver half of it in less time? Like I just gave you the answer, but yeah, you can see what I'm talking about. You can deliver a subset of functionality in less. I'm not talking about the value delivered. I didn't say anything about value. I'm simply talking about speed. Okay. When do you see things? Have you ever like had something in front of you and you didn't even notice it? What happened then? When did you notice it? Why didn't you notice it? What triggered the noticing of it? I would trigger somebody said something, right? We only see what we think and talk about. We don't just see stuff. Stuff goes in front of our eyes all the time. We don't even notice it. Number 5, so obvious. I just didn't even bother to ask you about it. We can't manage what we don't see. If you don't see it, you can't manage it. Okay. When do you multitask? Think of times you've multitasked. And if anybody here has never multitasked, get off. I hate you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to think about that. It's so sad. But the rest of you, sorry, the rest of you, when do you multitask? When do you wait for people? What caused the multitasking is what I mean when I say the when. What caused the multitasking? I would suggest that people, you or them, working beyond capacity. You have to wait for them. They have to wait for you. You get switched. Too many things are going on beyond what you can handle. What happens when you hand something off to somebody? You ever hand something off to somebody and it didn't go well? Actually, it's interesting. Sometimes you hand something off to somebody and it actually was better you handed it off. I admit I've learned through miscommunications a lot. Somebody gives me something, I go off and I said, that's not what I meant, Al. Oh, okay, well, let's talk about it now, or vice versa, actually. It usually goes the other way around. And they say something and say, oh, that's interesting. You know, I didn't mean that, but that's actually kind of cool. So it's not a guarantee, but very often that's why I say risk. You risk loss. You don't necessarily have loss. But it's something to be important. It's something to be aware of, because if you're going to risk the loss, and that loss could be a big thing, it could cause a lot of problems. Who best understands? It is not an anti-management thing. I love management. Management is very important in setting up ecosystems, but the person doing the work or the manager, who's more familiar with it? Well, there are actually 2 answers here. The people doing the work have more insights in how it should be done than those managing them. But here's the thing that's left out of management. When I get into roles, it'll be role thing about managers. Managers know more often about the context the work is being done in. So you kind of have this dilemma. I'm not calling that a first principle, though, because they don't. That's one where maybe they do, maybe they don't. So I just put this slide back up here. Here's the summary. Take a second to review those again. See, delays, local. It's not good. Subset, you know, I highlight some of the things that are here and I think are useful to look at. Now I want to look at something that just happened. I'm going to suggest that theory helps understanding. Okay, this is just something you have to run as a little thought experiment on your own. See, I just went through 8 first principles that some of you have heard and some of you haven't heard, but the way I did it, I was trying to access what I call your dormant knowledge, like what you knew, but you didn't quite know you knew it. You know, there's a lot of this stuff. You know, sometimes you see something, you get it. Oh, yeah, I get it now. I understood. But before that, you didn't get it. So I had you access your first principles. I mean, these first principles, your dormant knowledge, because I asked you questions. That's one way. There are other ways. Now you can believe these from your own experience, or again, on the discussion groups, let's chat about it. Okay. Now there's more. Goldratt also talks about what he calls inherent simplicity. And inherent simplicity is basically saying that at the foundation, and this was put forward by Newton, he said nature is exceedingly simple and harmonious with itself. Now, I know we're not in the classical physics age, but for most of us, we're not exhibiting influence by Heisenberg uncertainty principle or quarks or things like that. So I'll take a slightly engineering view, pragmatic view, and say Newton's good enough for me when it comes to the today world. Okay. There are some very interesting things to get into that. I'm actually, I won't get totally metaphysical on you here, but I actually believe with Chopra that we create our reality. It doesn't exist. In that sense, Einstein talks about the physical world is just a very persistent illusion, but we don't need to go into that metaphysics. Okay, so I'm going to say Newton's good enough for me. And you want to ask yourself, how do size, delays, capacity, visibility, handles, how do all things relate to each other? This is my point. They all interrelate. They all work together. You make one better, it makes the others better. This is a slide we had in the from the value stream stock, where you have these negative cycles and good cycles. Get quick feedback, work within capacity, eliminates delays. You go faster, reducing batch size. Okay. You can see how these things I've distilled by reading other people's work. I didn't, I just looked and saw what happened, and this is what gets discovered. Okay. Well, that's great. That's nice. Good theory. I like theory as long as it's validated. But what do we do with it? How do we tell what's going on? So for years, I was looking at a lot of really good consultants who were having troubles. And I think almost everybody I talked to, it's funny, I hadn't quite realized this. I would say the people I talked to were pretty much went from good to exceptional consultants. And I'm not surprised, because I would get triggered usually when I saw somebody doing something really great and I wanted to say, hey, how did they do that? So you can learn a lot from success just as much as you can learn from failure. I find the way you learn from failure isn't from failure, but it stops you to think, well, this isn't working. Let's try something else. And then you learn from something else that works. I've done that a lot by stopping when I'm having troubles and then watching other people. But I was noticing these really good consultants. I had some exceptional ones in my own company. And I would go to conferences and I would talk to the speakers in the hallway and things. And people would come to me with problems in the hallway. You say, well, they're coming to you with problems, Al. How are they that great? Well, they were great consultants because they wanted to learn. They weren't hiding from their failures or challenges. They were saying, hey, what can I do with these things? And that was really good. So I started looking to see what they did. And these are things I've come up with, but they are consistent with the first principles, okay? And factors for effective value streams are derived from them. They're based on Goldratt's theory of inherent simplicity, that they all work together. So we identified our stakeholders, so we know what success is for them, and then how do we do this? So one is, and I'm just going to list these here, but you could look, does this make sense? Are we working on the most valuable items to achieve success for stakeholders? Does this give you a dimension at least to look at to see if we're being effective? I haven't got it quantified. Actually, Amplio is working on this, or Success Engineering is working on this. Amplio is the system. One of the programs I have, the Amplio Consultant Educators, has projects people work on, and we're actually creating a scorecard of measuring these and other things. But it's at least a qualitative way. You can tell whether you're doing this or not to some extent. We're getting actionable feedback at all levels, meaning at the individual, team, group of teams, company. Are we building the right product in the right way? Are people being overloaded with too much work? Have we designed and optimized our processes with strategies to minimize waiting? In other words, have good value creation structures. Are we managing the ecosystem and not micromanaging the people? See, there's a role for management. It's just managing the ecosystem, not the people. We trust the people. We don't trust our ecosystem. They have to work together to change it. Is all work in process visible, including how it's done? Is there a focus on cost-effective continuous improvement of the ecosystem process and product? And are all levels of critical stakeholders suitably motivated to cooperate? Now, I'm not telling you how to fix this yet. That's what the workshops are about. And also, is everybody motivated? But remember, we can't manage it if we can't see it. This is trying to make it visible. These are things to look at. Now I'm going to put this up in a big screen. I don't know if that's too small to read. Can you all read that? Okay, I'm going to leave this up here for a little bit while I talk about this. So in this upper left, I talk about mental models. Well, first principles, we did this and this. So there's a little bit more, but I said this. Guidance, I said this. I'm going to go into this more in the next segment. These are the ones I just mentioned, okay? And these just go into it a little bit different. I'm not going to go into this now. This is something, if you're watching, you can pause. If you're coming in later, you can pause. And this screen is available on Thinkific as a download. So if you want to use it, you'll notice I've given it out as Creative Commons, so that's fine to use. Okay, so this is the end of this section. Systems are more about the relationships, not the components themselves. There are very few elements governing the whole system. We don't have to deal with hundreds. Now, I'm not saying there aren't hundreds of subtle things, secondary things, but the primary ones I've given you. If you think there are others that are more important, have a conversation with me. I'm always updating this. Not always. I go to bed sometimes and I don't update it in my sleep, but pretty much. Okay, we could use first principles to understand what's going on. We could use value streams to guide us.